Then this little quote I'm going to give you is from a man I know very well who was a CES employee all his life until about 5 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago. And he says, he has a story on the internet that's very compelling. He said he constantly got warnings from the LDS administrators to be careful about what I discussed with people. It was a veiled threat to avoid anything that the church doesn't want to have to answer questions about, especially if it revealed flaws in the leaders or the church bureaucracy. Gallon Oakes, again, the one who was headed of the Supreme Court one time in his life, it is one thing to deprecate a person who exercises corporate power or even governmental power. It is quite another thing to criticize or deprecate a person for the performance of an office to which he has been called of God. It does not matter that the criticism is true. In other words, this is my friend speaking now. In other words, distort the truth any way you have in order to protect and cover up for the brethren and their mistakes. Keep the mystique alive that they are infallible. And this man, you know, knew he was going to leave the church for several years, but he was at the end of his career, and he was hanging around trying to teach these students to think and open their minds, and was called in constantly. And actually, at one point, was asked to bring his tax returns in so they could check and see whether he was paying full tithe. And he eventually did leave the church. He's a brilliant man and a very nice man. And I've heard him say many, many things about some of the good stuff that happened when he was working for the church. But he eventually, the integrity of his mind couldn't stand it anymore. Well, there's a lot more I could give you, but I will tell you one other little blip, and then just talk for 5 minutes about some of the issues about leaving the church. The church has an organization, a committee, which is called the Strengthening the Church Members Committee. In the late 1980s, under Ezra Taft Benson, who was the prophet at the time, was formed a committee called Strengthening the Church Members Committee to keep files on potential church dissidents and collect their published material for possible later use in church disciplinary proceedings. The church denied this committee existed for a while, but there became ample proof that it did exist. And finally, in 1992, the church officially acknowledged the existence of the committee and explained that the committee provides local church leadership with information designed to help them counsel with members who, however well-meaning, may hinder the progress of the church through public criticism. So, you know, I'm sure I have a file. And I've known several people who've been excommunicated. The church went through a period in the early 90s where they were excommunicating what they called intellectuals in the church. And Boyd K. Packer, who's been an incredibly influential apostle his whole life, gave a talk at BYU where he said that the three enemies of the church were homosexuals, feminists, and intellectuals. And that caused quite a stir. And it was shortly after that that they purged the church of several very highly well-known intellectuals who had written books and so forth. All right, letting people go, which is, well, I might mention this one too. Again, Boyd K. Packer, who seems to know it all about what's supposed to go on in the church, gave a talk a short time ago even about funerals and how funerals should not be the prerogative of the family to decide what goes on there. And he says bishops should not yield the arrangement of these two members. They should not yield to the membership for the arrangement of funerals or missionary farewells. It is not the proper order of things for members or family to expect to decide who will speak and for how long. It goes on to say that the funeral should be a time to preach the gospel, not talk about the person who has died, and that he has had instructions, he's left instructions that I've told my brethren that when my funeral is held, if any of them speak or talk about me, I will rise up and correct them. The gospel is to be preached. Now this has become an intimate thing in my family because I have a very old elderly father who is 95 and he has good health, but I imagine in the next and he's very devout Mormon. He's a very, very nice man. I told you some about him last time, how many good things he's done for people. But he's very obedient and devout, and he has made a decision that his children will not speak at his funeral because I am an apostate, and he can't have two of his children speak and not the third living. So he is going to reach down into the next generation and have a grandson talk at the funeral. So, you know, I am preventing even my siblings being able to speak to their father's funeral. And that's just the way it goes, and they're very devout. Then, leaving the church, I'm going to take 2 minutes. In order to leave the church, the best way to do it is to resign, because there have been court cases that have gone through the system where people have resigned from the church, and then the church has held what they call a disciplinary council on them and excommunicated them. So on their record, you know, for all their family to see forevermore on the genealogy records is, you know, a little red flag that says excommunicated. Some people finally took that to court, and the law now says if you send them a letter and say you have resigned from the church, you are no longer a member. They have no hold over you. But the church does everything it can to get you to change your mind. And I can tell you a dozen horror stories of where it's gone on for 5 years before they will officially send you your letter telling you're no longer a member. And they sometimes, some people, it goes right through. It depends on who your local leadership is lots of times. Someone recently wrote a resignation letter or sent it to both Salt Lake and their bishop, which is the best way to do it. And the bishop flat out said, you cannot do this. Yeah, I'm going to excommunicate you. And so he did his homework and came back and gave him the court cases and so forth. And so he let it go on. But it is extremely difficult to leave, and it's extremely difficult psychologically. And I talked quite a bit about that last time. How difficult it is to be the one in your family who leaves. And it's completely altered forever my relationship with my children. It's altered my relationship with my siblings. My father and I have chosen not to talk about it. We have a very close relationship. But he said to my sister that I don't understand why Sue won't talk to me about it, you know, why she left. Well, he's never asked me. He's never asked me. And I don't have any desire to tell him because he's elderly and this has been his whole life. Okay, I'm going to open up to questions. We've got 12 minutes. Okay.
Skipping the notion of why anyone would believe anything like this, and because millions of people do believe it, I just kind of get caught up in turning fog into geometry. And what I mean by that is you take these vague spiritual notions and then it tells you how to live your life. And the thing that made me stumble was, if you're not a corporeal body in the celestial arena, you just have a mind, why would you need a black servant?
No, Mormon doctrine is that you are resurrected then with a physical body. When you go back, you will at some point, you know, because the Bible talks about that.
I accept it all.
Yeah.
If it clears my acne.
Okay, over here. Okay, well, I'll let you guys decide. You just
Yes, ma'am. I've heard
make it quick.
I've heard some of the teachings in the early church were that the sun and the moon were inhabited, and that part of the future of people who are converted to Mormonism here was to either preach or be gods on other planets of other stars, etc., etc. Could you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, very quickly. The doctrine is that if you are worthy to go to the upper reaches of the celestial kingdom, you will have your corporal body, and you will eventually create worlds of your own and populate them with your spirit children, that your bazillion polygamous wives in heaven will be producing these spirit children for who knows how many eons, and that you will then send those spirit children down to your world. And so see, this is a theory of eternal progression, and that's why the church has this little couplet that as God is, no, as man is, God once was, and as God is, man will become, which President Hinckley now is disavowing. He publicly disavowed that couplet that every Mormon under the, you know, over the age of 25 has heard their entire life, that we can become gods. That God is not the only one. there are many up there, we will become gods if we're worthy.
People don't know